Good evening to you both, and thank you so much for your time. I'm going to start with you, Professor Isike. What were your impressions as you were listening to the different visions by the different presidents?
Well, thank you for having me, and good evening to your viewers. Look, it sounded like it's the beginning of trying to resolve some of the national interests of these different countries that have been, impairing on their ability to coordinate the goals that were set when BRICS was initially established in 2009 before South Africa joined in 2010 or so. The major challenge for me that I'd seen was acting in unity. They have the potential, they have some good bargaining power. If you consider the fact that together, like President Ramaphosa said, the BRICS countries account for about 41% of the world population and a quarter of the global economy, which if we break it down, would be about 31.5% of global GDP and 16% of global trade. So you can see that there is some good bargaining power. We saw, for instance, how they came together to help rally around behind Russia to stave off the effects of US-led sanctions against it following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But the challenge has always been whether they can act with unity and coordinate, the different interests within the BRICS movement itself to be able to articulate a common vision that they would support. But from what I hear them say today, it appears that they are on a pathway to actually doing this coordination, and I think that's important.
And I'm going to talk about that coordination in just a moment. But for you, Professor Thomashausen, how did you find each and every single speaker? Because it does look like they know what they want to achieve. Some of them even saying that this is how far they've gone, and these are some of the plans that they would like to put in place. You are on mute, Prof.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, good evening. Look, it's of course a big hype. It's a big event, maybe the biggest event for South Africa ever to have maybe up to 50 heads of state in the country and a very full and important agenda. These statements by the 5 heads of state of the BRICS, they outline that this is not just a platform for collaboration, but it is more. There's a BRICS culture emerging. And I think in the last statement of President Xi Jinping, this became very clear when he said, we want to build the global garden. And he obviously referred to the statement a few months back of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the European Union, who said very arrogantly, Europe is a garden, and we have to protect this garden against the jungle on our borders. So the new culture, the BRICS culture, is one of inclusion. It is the have-nots, and China said more have-nots have to join. The BRICS has to become bigger, not just the Global South. The Global South is a bit of a wrong term because there's Australia in the Global South who is busy arming itself with nuclear weapons to threaten China. So it is really that part of the world where the GDP per capita is very often below $1,000, or as in the case of South Africa, $6,600, and now in China, $12,600 per capita. And the figures show us that only 25 years ago, the Chinese GDP per capita was $900. It increased 13 times in 25 years. And this is the development model that the countries that are coming together are trying to get inspiration from, are trying to understand how did China manage this unbelievable, unmatched success.
And I'm going to get to the issue of the expansion in just a moment, but Professor Thomashausen, one of the things that you say is that a BRICS culture seems to be emerging, but does it look like and sound like they are in one accord about what this culture looks like and how it's likely going to impact the BRICS nations going forward?
Well, I think the one point where they are definitely in agreement is that that all differences, all conflicts must be resolved through communication, through listening to each other, not just shouting at each other, not just accusing each other. And that is very different. That's very different from what the West is currently doing. The West judges and then condemns. And the BRICS nations all agree that we need to make sure that conflicts and differences don't result in the use of military force. Other points are maybe less strong.
Yeah.
We can see a bit of a difference in the presentations by Modi and also from Brazil. And also Putin. They have explained in great detail all their successes and all the good things that the countries are doing, striving also towards a green energy economy. It was the Chinese president Xi Jinping who presented more of a vision, and I think he will definitely strive to infuse that vision into this BRICS summit.
And I'm going to get to how South Africa then fares in just a moment. But Professor Isike, one of the things that is very clear, even from, the remarks that were delivered on behalf of President Xi, is that the issue of expansion is one that China is for, saying that it's inclusivity. They want everybody on board to cover as many of these nations as they possibly can. But I wonder, as they go into this particular retreat, let's talk about how the dynamics then play out, because according to some reports, it doesn't look like they're agreeing on this issue of expansion.
Yes, India has not clearly come out with its position. I think they are undecided from the last report that we saw, and then I think Brazil also doesn't really quite support the expansion, and even for countries like South Africa that does support it, one may want to wonder whether it is not more prudent, for South Africa, which is the smallest country in the BRICS, if you look at all the measures of economic growth and population, you would want to wonder whether it will not be more prudent for them to actually consolidate their base and have a clear sense of what they will be benefiting from the BRICS currently as it is, as opposed to when you have an expansion of it. Because the minute you expand, there are countries there that would then be competing for the benefits even from within Africa with South Africa, and of course that's not a bad thing in itself, but you want to really think about this very carefully. But to answer your question more directly, there are divisions amongst them, and I do not think that these are things that they will easily resolve in this particular summit.
So can they then present a united front then, Professor Isike, at the end of this particular retreat? Because certainly a position is going to have to be taken on this issue of expansion. And when they give their report back, the nations will want to know, have they agreed on this? Is there a position or not? So can there be one voice in this?
There can be, but again, to remember in international politics, there are the national interest is core, and every country has the right to look at their national interest. But again, too, if they look at the fact that in politics or international politics, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, but permanent interests. The question is whether they can agree on what is a common interest that is beneficial to everyone. Some of the countries, even within the BRICS, there are internal mutual suspicion, for instance, between China and India. Not a lot of trust there, and that can become an issue. China, especially Russia, and you can tell from the way that President Lula spoke about the dollarization, that's a very important subject for them. It's also very important for Russia. Now, these two countries and China, an expansion of the BRICS would benefit de-dollarization, because it will have to need more people in the camp for de-dollarization to make more meaning for them. So that can be something that can help them. But then would it benefit South Africa in the same way? Would India see this as advancing its interests, considering its relations with the United States? So these are issues that may arise. But I think that at the end of the day, they may come out with a common position to say, we are considering it, we are willing to do it, but just not now.
And I suppose, as you say, that the issues, when it depends on one's position, one's interest, in fact, to determine one's position. But Professor Thomashausen, one of the things that, we heard a little earlier on in the day and even yesterday was that this issue of de-dollarization is off the agenda. It will not be spoken about. But now we are seeing, the Russian president putting it back strongly on the agenda, kind of signaling that there is no U-turn on this particular one. And I wonder, how then do they begin to navigate this as they go to that private retreat?
Well, maybe President Lula put it even stronger than President Putin. But we had like an ice bucket. I felt the introductory report by Zim Chabalala from the business meetings, where as a banker, he basically said it's impossible, at least not possible in the short term. And this was somewhat echoed by President Ramaphosa, who also took this line that the Business Council should guide the BRICS Summit on which countries could maybe join. So there would be an economic analysis. And then countries with a weak economy, like the DRC or Zimbabwe, would automatically fall out. And how do we tell them that? If we admit Egypt, and if we admit Algeria and maybe Argentina, which is also in a deep financial crisis. So this meeting tonight will be difficult. I'm not sure where the compromise could be. Maybe some ingenious trick would say we will have two types of BRICS membership. The founding members, the 5 members, will be more involved in taking certain decisions, and there will be an observer status for maybe all the 20 countries or 23 countries that have formally requested to join.
I just wish all 3 of us were flies on the wall to listen to what's happening in that particular retreat, so we are able to, just really analyze exactly what's going on here, because there's just so much to talk about. And you think about just how they begin to chart a way forward, especially post some of the compromises, as you say, Prof, that might need to be made. But will they be difficult ones? Will they be made? Will they not be? So let's see then how things unfold during the course of this particular summit as we continue to have these conversations. Let me thank you both for your time. That was Professor Andrew Thomashausen, Unisa Professor Emeritus of International Law, and Professor Christopher Isike, Professor of African Politics and International Relations in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria. And this is, one of those conversations that one, would like to have for a good hour, but time is always the enemy. Because honestly, there's so much that one can unpack from this one, especially when you think about just how there's been talk around these particular BRICS nations, and for some, some presidents, we've seen some reports suggesting that China is calling for an accelerated approach to surpass the G7 countries. And even today, President Lula talking about how this particular bloc is now accounting for more of the share of the GDP when it comes, as compared to as compared to the G7 countries. So quite a lot is coming out here, and really you think about the removal of red tape, and this is something that the African continent is also talking about, particularly when it comes to the cost of doing business. So there's a lot that we're still going to unpack for you as this business forum has really closed, and some of the recommendations that this particular forum has also made as they handed over their report. We'll continue to just pick it apart and see exactly what are they talking about here, and whether or not are we going to be able to see a unified approach when it comes to the end of this particular retreat that the heads of states are now taking.